Hey guys, tonight, the modern American office worker eyes the clock counting down the minutes to 5, the official release from the cubicle. In ancient Rome, the countdown was shorter, the transition far more dramatic, and the concept of quitting time entirely different. For the Roman citizen, whether he was a senator in a toga or a plebeian hauling baskets of fish, the day was divided into two fundamental and opposing states, negotium and otium. The word negotium literally translates to not otium, neck, not, otium, leisure. It was the business of life, the political wrangling in the forum, the legal arguments, the counting of accounts, the construction of temples, the endless administration of a growing empire. The Roman was expected to be a man of action, devoted to civic duty and the pursuit of honor, dignitas. From the moment the first rays of sun crested the Capitoline Hill, the city was a hive of negotium. Senators held their salutatio, the morning reception where clients gathered to pay respects and seek favors. Shopkeepers opened their stalls in the noisy, crowded markets. Builders hauled marble through the streets, the air thick with the dust of constant construction and the shouting of vendors. It was a rigorous, highly structured schedule, fueled by ambition and necessity. The tyranny of the sun clock. But the Romans did not work on the 8-hour clock we know. Their day was divided into 12 hours of daylight, meaning the length of an hour constantly changed with the seasons. Yet for the most of the year, one truth held fast. The official end to negotium arrived sharply around the 6th hour, or what we would call noon or 1 o'clock. This was not simply a lunch break. It was a fundamental social shift. The state and the wealthy elite understood that the masses needed a prescribed period of rest and recreation to prevent social unrest and maintain civic order. The long, exhausting summer afternoons were considered unsuitable for serious work anyway. Thus, as the sun climbed highest and began its descent, a collective sigh of relief, often accompanied by the ringing of bells and the locking of office doors, swept across the city. The pressure of negotium was deliberately and abruptly released. For the elite, this moment was a carefully managed pivot. They would retreat from the forum, the law courts, or the Senate House to their domus, townhouse, or to their country villas. The change in attire alone symbolized the transition. The formal, heavy toga, the burdensome badge of civic responsibility, was often shed in favor of lighter, more comfortable tunics and slippers. This was a physical declaration. I am no longer working, I am now living. The plebeians rushed to leisure. For the plebeians, the vast majority of Rome's population, the end of the workday meant a rush to the only shared space of true leisure, the public baths or thermae. They couldn't retreat to private libraries or quiet gardens. For them, otium meant community, noise, and cheap, accessible pleasure. Imagine the scene. Thousands of Romans released simultaneously from their workshops, docks, and street stalls, converging on the great bath complexes like the baths of Diocletian or Caracalla. The streets, still warm from the morning's traffic, suddenly teemed with purpose. This was not a slow wind-down. It was a race to secure a good spot, to catch up with friends, and to escape the grime and stress of the morning. For the common Roman, otium was not about quiet contemplation. It was about stimulation. It was about socializing, exercising, shouting, splashing, and gambling. It was about seeing and being seen. It was about moving from the harsh reality of their crowded tenements in Sule into the grand marble-clad luxury of the public space, a luxury paid for by the state and designed to make even the poorest citizen feel momentarily powerful. The true meaning of otium. To an American audience, the term otium is best understood as cultivated downtime. It was more than just not working. It was a time dedicated to pursuits that enriched the mind, body, and soul. It encompassed everything from the body, exercise and cleansing at the baths, the mind, reading, writing poetry or philosophical debate, the spirit, attending the games or visiting a temple, social life, the elaborate dinner party or convivium. The goal of otium was to make the Roman a better, more complete citizen. It was the necessary counterpoint to the rigor of negotium. By embracing this transition at midday, the Roman was not just taking a break, he was preparing himself to be a better participant in the civic, political, and social life of the most powerful city in the world. The stage is now set. The clock has struck noon. The toga is off. The city's pulse has changed from the frantic beat of commerce to the expectant hum of relaxation. The Romans are ready to move from the forum to the baths, where the next chapter of their day and our story begins.
The unspoken hierarchy of Roman relaxation. If the end of negotium was a collective sigh of relief, the start of otium was a three-part symphony played out daily across the vast expanse of Rome. Once the official business of the morning was complete, every Roman, from the most powerful senator to the lowest freedman, oriented their afternoon and evening around the same triumvirate of indulgence: the social bath, the public spectacle, and the evening feast. These were not merely recreational activities. They were the essential pillars that held up the Roman social structure during leisure hours, each one defined by its own unwritten rules, cost, and social cachet. The social bath, democracy in marble. The public thermae, the baths, represented the first and most democratic pillar of Roman relaxation. They were, quite simply, non-negotiable. For a nominal fee, or often subsidized by a wealthy patron, every citizen could access spaces of breathtaking grandeur, complete with heated rooms, cold plunge pools, exercise yards, and libraries. This affordability was critical. It made the baths a unique social equalizer. Yet, in this seeming equality, a strict, unspoken hierarchy persisted. A senator and a slave might be in the same caldarium, hot room, sweating side by side, but their interaction was meticulously choreographed by custom. The senator arrived with his entourage, slaves to carry his oil and scrapers, strigils, and clients to attend to his every need. His presence commanded deference. He would use the bath complex not just for cleansing, but for informal business. Deals were struck in the warm, humid air, political gossip was exchanged, and favors were granted or denied, all while naked and covered in oil. For the common plebeian, the bath was pure, unadulterated pleasure. It was the only time they could escape the claustrophobia of their tenements, exercise their body, and engage in cheap socializing. Their hierarchy was based on timing. The best time to arrive was immediately after the midday rush, before the rooms became too crowded, too noisy, and too chaotic. Status wasn't based on who you were, but who you were seen talking to. The baths offered a crucial opportunity for the lower classes to make fleeting contact with powerful patrons. A nod, a brief word, a shared jest that could translate into tangible support later on. The public spectacle, a universal addiction. The second and perhaps most passionate pillar was the public spectacle. This included the chariot races at the Circus Maximus and the gladiatorial contests and beast hunts in the Colosseum or local amphitheaters. While the baths were a daily routine, the games were an event, often lasting days and even weeks. This pillar was the ultimate tool of social control and collective passion. The emperor provided the shows, known as the ludi, using them to remind the populace of his generosity and power. Unlike the baths, the hierarchy here was strictly architectural. The elite, senators and vestal virgins, sat in the prime marble-lined seats closest to the action. Their comfort and proximity to the emperor were physical declarations of their status. The equestrian class sat just behind the senators, still privileged but clearly secondary. The plebeians occupied the upper, cheaper tiers or sat on wooden benches. They were the loudest, the most invested,
and the most volatile audience. Their presence was a mass of unified energy that the elite both courted and feared. For the American audience, the best comparison is the modern Super Bowl or NBA Finals, a high-stakes tribal passion that cuts across class lines but remains segregated by the cost and quality of the seat. The games offered a total sensory overload, a chance to gamble heavily, and a sanctioned opportunity to shout abuse at officials, trainers, or politicians without fear of immediate reprisal. The relaxation here was rooted in escapism and the sheer adrenaline of shared intensity. The evening feast, the ultimate status marker. The most rigid and socially complex pillar was the convivium, or the evening feast. If the baths were democratic and the games were tribal, the dinner party was strictly aristocratic. This was where otium became an absolute performance of wealth, taste, and power. The rules were codified. A good convivium required excellent wine, uncut with water if one was feeling rebellious, exotic food, and most importantly, the right guest list. The host, often a wealthy senator or businessman, curated the seating arrangement on the triclinium, three-couch dining setup, with extreme care. The guests of honor lay on the lectus medius, middle couch, enjoying the finest cuts of meat and the choicest vintage wine. Their conversation was valued, their wit expected. The lesser guests, clients, were relegated to the lowest couches, often served inferior food and wine, a concept known as distinctiones, distinctions in service. They were there to applaud the host's generosity, provide amusement, or simply serve as visual props for the host's power. This pillar of otium was a pressure cooker of social climbing. A successful convivium could secure a political alliance, launch a young man's career, or seal a lucrative business deal. It wasn't about simply eating, it was about consuming status. It was a long, luxurious, and often drunken performance that could last until the early hours of the morning, ensuring the Roman returned to Negotium the next day, feeling both sated and strategically positioned. The daily trio. In the end, the Roman day of leisure was a carefully planned journey through these three spheres. Midday, the baths, physical cleansing and necessary informal networking. Afternoon, the spectacles, emotional release and tribal bonding with the masses. Evening, the feast, intellectual sparring, strategic positioning, and the height of self-indulgence. This structured daily indulgence, from the cleansing steam of the baths to the roar of the arena to the quiet, cunning conversation at a banquet, defined what it meant to be a leisured citizen of the Roman world.
This is the perfect progression. Having introduced the baths as the first pillar of otium, we will now plunge directly into the sensory details and the social complexities of this essential Roman institution. Social climbing in the thermae. The dust and the din of Negotium were washed away not by rain, but by oil, sweat, and steam. Once the clock struck the 6th hour, the public bathhouse, or thermae, ceased to be a simple amenity and transformed into the nerve center of Roman social and political life. It was the great equalizer, the essential daily appointment, and crucially, a highly effective, if unorthodox, marketplace for social climbing. To the modern eye, a Roman bathhouse was an architectural marvel. The baths of Caracalla, for instance, were a sprawling complex designed to accommodate thousands of people simultaneously, a triumph of engineering featuring massive vaulted ceilings, imported marble, mosaics, and vast quantities of controlled heat and running water. But to the Roman, it was simply the place to be. For a quadrans, the smallest copper coin, less than the cost of a basic cup of wine, a citizen bought access to luxury that rivaled the emperor's palace. A raucous gathering. Imagine stepping through the entrance of the thermae around the middle of the afternoon. The air is immediately a humid, enveloping blanket,
thick with the scent of olive oil, stale perfume, and the faint metallic tang of hot bronze and sweat. The noise is overwhelming, as the philosopher Seneca famously detailed while living above one. Imagine the mixture of noises, the grunt of the heavily built fellow working out with lead weights, the sharp, high shout of the masseur hitting the shoulder, the clamor of the man who dives into the cold pool with a huge splash, the cries of the vendors selling drinks, sausages, and pastries, and worst of all, the hair plucker with his thin, piercing voice advertising his painful trade. This chaos was the soundtrack to otium. The bathhouse was fundamentally a public, raucous, and deeply communal space. The entire sequence, from dressing to cleansing, was a performance. The palestra and the performance of health. The first stop was often the palestra, the large open-air exercise courtyard. Here, Romans engaged in basic physical training, wrestling, running, lifting weights, or playing various ball games like prigone. This exercise was less about fitness and more about public display. For the wealthy, this was a chance to showcase their physical health and vitality, attributes closely associated with civic virtue. For the ambitious plebeian, it was a rare opportunity to catch the eye of a patron. If a rich man was looking for a new bodyguard, a strong apprentice, or simply a young man to join his client network, the palestra was the scouting ground. A well-executed wrestling move or a powerful throw of a ball might earn a coveted invitation to a dinner party. The ritual of oil and scrape. The real purpose of the baths began after the exercise, the cleansing ritual. Romans did not use soap as we know it. Instead, they covered themselves in olive oil, sometimes scented with perfume. The oil served two functions. It absorbed the grime and sweat of the day, and it was a status symbol, as expensive imported oils were highly prized. After oiling, the Roman would enter the sequence of heated rooms. First, the tepidarium, warm room, a gentle transition where one might chat and prepare for the heat. The caldarium, hot room, the main event, a vast steamy space heated by a hypocaust, underfloor heating system. Here, conversation was less about business and more about enduring the heat and sweating out the impurities. The laconicum, dry sauna, sometimes used for the most intense detoxification. The crucial moment occurred after the intense heat, the scraping. Using a bronze tool called a strigil, the Roman would scrape the mixture of oil, sweat, and dirt from his skin. While the poor scraped themselves, the rich brought their slaves to perform this intimate task. To be scraped by a slave in full view of one's peers was the silent, daily declaration of dignitas, a reminder of one's affluence and ability to command service. The cold plunge. The final decisive stage was the frigidium, the cold plunge pool. This was where the most important conversations often took place. The shock of the cold water, the clarity of thought after the steamy haze made it a favorite location for quick, pointed discussions. A patron might summon a client to the cold water for a brief, critical exchange. Will you vote for me in the elections? Will you testify on my behalf in the land dispute? Since one was entirely naked and vulnerable in the cold, wet air, the transaction was swift and direct. The bathhouse, therefore, became a space where alliances were forged, rumors were validated, and political strategies were finalized, all under the guise of daily ablution. The American equivalent would be the power lunch or a golf game, but far more frequent, public, and revealing. The network effect. The thermae was the supreme networking tool because it transcended all other forms of leisure in its frequency and accessibility. It was a mandatory part of the day year-round. If you wanted to find someone, check the baths. The gossip exchange, the libraries, adjacent to the bathing halls, were not always used for reading. They were perfect spots for quiet, one-on-one gossip and intelligence gathering, filtering the latest political rumors before they hit the forum. The patron-client bond. For the client, attending the same bathhouse as his patron was a daily sign of loyalty. The patron would subtly acknowledge his clients, perhaps a shared joke, a wave, or a brief massage, cementing the bond that defined Roman society. The vendor economy. The baths also supported a miniature economy of vendors who provided drinks, snacks, and personal services, further proving that even in leisure, negotium was never far away. In essence, the Roman bathhouse was the daily, naked truth of Roman society. It stripped away the formal clothes and the official titles, but it reinforced the deeper, more complex hierarchies of patronage, wealth, and power. Once thoroughly cleansed, massaged, and socially engaged, the Roman was ready for the next, more thrilling pillar of his otium, the public spectacle.
Why the arena was essential to the Roman soul. If the baths were the engine of Roman social networking, the amphitheater, most famously the Colosseum, was the Roman soul's furnace. When a Roman spoke of true otium, their thoughts inevitably turned to the spectacle of life, death, and skill played out on the blood-soaked sands. The gladiatorial games, along with the other ludi, public games, were not mere entertainment. They were a complex, brutal, and utterly essential pillar of Roman life, woven into the very fabric of social cohesion and political control. The phrase panem et circenses, bread and circuses, encapsulates the political philosophy behind the games. This policy, articulated by the satirist Juvenal, suggested that the common Roman citizen cared only for subsidized food, panem, and public entertainment, circenses. While cynical, it was profoundly true in its impact. By guaranteeing the masses two things, a consistent food supply and free, thrilling entertainment, the emperors and magistrates secured peace and loyalty. The games served as a crucial outlet for the frustrations and boredom of the urban poor. Instead of plotting rebellion against the elite, the plebeians could direct their collective fervor toward cheering for their favorite gladiator or yelling abuse at a hated faction leader. The arena was a temporary sanctioned pressure release valve for the entire society. From funerary rites to national obsession, the origins of gladiatorial combat were surprisingly somber. They began as part of aristocratic funerary rites, munera, where slaves or captives fought to honor a dead noble. The shedding of blood was believed to purify the community and honor the deceased. As Rome expanded, so did the scale of the games. By the time the massive Colosseum was dedicated in 80 CE, the ritualistic sacrifice had been transformed into a national obsession and a colossal commercial enterprise. The contests moved beyond simple one-on-one duels to include venationes, elaborate hunts involving exotic wild animals like lions, bears, and elephants, brought from the far reaches of the empire. Naumachie, massive staged sea battles, though usually done in specially flooded arenas or lakes, not the Colosseum itself after a certain point. Public executions, a horrific but popular form of spectacle where criminals and prisoners of war were dispatched by beasts, fire, or forced combat. The sheer scale of the operation, the logistics of transporting animals from Africa and training thousands of combatants, was a perpetual demonstration of Rome's military and economic might. The games were a daily reminder to the citizens that their world was vast and their city was supreme. Slaves, superstars, and the ambiguity of honor. The gladiator was the central paradox of Roman society. Mostly slaves, criminals, or prisoners of war forced into the bloody profession, they occupied the very lowest rung of the social ladder. They were infames,
shameful individuals, stripped of citizen rights. Yet a successful gladiator could achieve a celebrity status that transcended class. Names like Spiculus or Hermes were household words. Their images appeared on lamps and mosaics. Women fawned over them, and wealthy patrons paid huge sums of money for their services, or even their blood, believed to have medicinal properties. The gladiator was a symbol of ultimate Roman virtue: courage, discipline, skill, and the willingness to face death with virtus, manly courage. When a gladiator fought well, he redeemed his lack of status through his performance, embodying an idealized martial spirit that the average Roman citizen, long removed from the legions, could only admire. The ultimate moment of connection between the stands and the sand was the decision of life or death, delivered by the crowd's famous thumbs up or thumbs down, a collective power shared momentarily by all citizens. The architecture of hierarchy. The Colosseum was an architectural manifesto of social order. As we noted, the seating arrangement was designed to reinforce the day-to-day hierarchy. 1. The podium, the lowest level, reserved for the emperor, vestal virgins, senators, and special guests. Their proximity to the emperor validated their position. The Maenianum Primum, the first gallery, reserved for the equestrian class, wealthy businessmen and knights. The Maenianum Secundum, divided into the upper, imum, and lower, summum, sections for the plebeians and common citizens. The top tier, reserved for women, slaves, and the poorest citizens, offering a distant view. When an American audience considers the stadium, they think of tickets and price points. The Roman thought of ordo, social order. By assigning seats based on social rank, the emperor ensured that every citizen, while enjoying the chaos of the fight, was simultaneously reminded of his place in the Roman cosmos. The games were therefore the greatest instrument of both unification, cheering for the same fighter, and stratification, sitting in the proper place. The thrym and the reflection. Why did Romans crave this violence? For a civilization that prided itself on law and order, the taste for blood seems contradictory. Moral education. Many Romans viewed the arena as a kind of moral classroom. The gladiator who fought honorably, even in defeat, provided a powerful lesson in resilience, a virtue the Romans admired above all others. Confronting mortality. In an age of high infant mortality, plague, and constant warfare, Romans lived closer to death than modern society. The arena provided a safe, ritualized space to confront and master the fear of death itself. Spectators experienced an intense communal catharsis, walking away feeling invigorated and alive. The shared experience. The ludi were perhaps the most powerful force for social cohesion in Rome. Citizens from every walk of life, from the man who owned half of Africa to the man who swept the streets, shared a few hours of unified passion, fear, and excitement. This shared emotional state was the glue that bound the vast, diverse, and often unequal city together. The gladiators' struggle, fueled by bread and demanded by the circuses, was the ultimate expression of Roman otium, an intense, exhilarating, and strategically managed moment of collective release that guaranteed the stability of the empire. The next step in this grand Roman day of leisure moves from the ultimate fight for survival to the ultimate display of speed and skill, the chariot race.
Celebrity culture in the age of the chariot race. If the Colosseum provided the Romans with moral drama and a connection to ancient martial virtue, the Circus Maximus offered pure, unadulterated escapism, fueled by speed, wealth, and the intoxicating rush of celebrity worship. While the gladiator was a powerful symbol, the champion charioteer was a true rock star, a man who defied the infamy label and often accumulated a fortune and public devotion, rivaling any emperor. The Circus Maximus, a vast open-air racetrack carved into the valley between the Palatine and Aventine hills, was the largest structure in ancient Rome, capable of holding an astonishing 150,000 to 250,000 spectators. This gargantuan venue was the epicenter of a sporting frenzy that dominated the Roman leisure calendar, making the modern Daytona 500 look like a minor league event. A tribal addiction. The racing in the circus was organized around 4 major professional teams or factions, each distinguished by a color: the reds, Rusiata; the whites, Albata; the greens, Prasina; and the blues, Veneta. To the Roman spectator, these colors were more than just team affiliations. They were surrogate political parties, social tribes, and even semi-religious allegiances. People were born into their factional loyalty and often remained fanatically devoted for life. Supporting the greens or the blues was a core part of one's identity. Factional violence was not uncommon, mirroring the modern-day rivalries between soccer hooligans in Europe. These color-coded loyalties offered the plebeian an emotional investment and a sense of belonging, far stronger than that offered by the often aloof political system. The races themselves were a spectacle of raw horsepower and nerve. Chariots were light, two-wheeled vehicles, often pulled by 4 horses, quadriga, driven by drivers wrapped in leather straps holding the reins. The goal was to complete 7 laps around the spina, the long dividing barrier, navigating the perilous turns at the ends of the track where most crashes, naufragia, occurred. The drivers often wrapped the reins around their waists, a necessary measure for control, but one that guaranteed a brutal fate if they crashed. They would be dragged to death unless they could cut themselves free with the knife they carried. This element of high-stakes danger only heightened the crowd's intoxication. The rise of the auriga superstar. The true focus of the circus was the auriga, charioteer. Unlike gladiators, charioteers were often freedmen or slaves who, through success, could purchase their freedom and achieve extraordinary riches. A champion charioteer was arguably the first true professional celebrity in Western history. Their fame was universal. Their names were etched on monuments, immortalized in mosaics, and chanted by hundreds of thousands of fans. Their portraits were sold as trinkets, and graffiti celebrating their victories covered city walls. The money they earned was staggering, dwarfing the wealth of many senators and equestrians. The most famous example is Gaius Apuleius Diocles, a Lusitanian Portuguese driver for the Red faction. His career spanned 24 years and won over 1,462 of his 4,257 races. His prize money, recorded in an inscription set up by his admirers, totaled HS 35,863,120 sesterces. In modern terms, adjusting for purchasing power and imperial budget comparisons, this figure is estimated to be equivalent to tens, possibly hundreds of millions of modern US dollars. Diocles retired a phenomenally rich man, a feat nearly impossible for any other person of non-elite background in Roman society. The psychology of fanaticism. Why did the Romans go so wild for these drivers? Speed and skill. The races were terrifyingly fast, requiring split-second decisions and immense physical bravery. The successful driver was a master tactician, maneuvering through the tight pack of chariots while avoiding catastrophic crashes. Identification and triumph. For the poor citizen, the charioteer was a champion who literally rose from the bottom of the social heap to the top of the economic one. When the charioteer won, the fan won. It was a vicarious triumph over the rigid class system of Rome. The high-stakes bet. The races were inseparable from gambling. Romans, from the highest elite to the humblest cobbler, placed heavy bets on the outcomes.
The roar of the crowd was not just for the drivers, it was the ecstatic eruption of thousands of people whose fortunes had just been made or lost on the turn of a wheel. The excitement of the circus was inherently linked to financial risk and reward. Factional politics and imperial patronage. The emperors were keenly aware of the power of the circus. Many emperors publicly displayed their own factional bias, most notably Caligula and Nero, who were fanatical supporters of the Green faction. Nero would reportedly spend hours in the stables, bonding with his favorite drivers and horses, treating them as personal friends, a behavior that shocked the conservative Senate but thrilled the populace. Imperial patronage cemented the game's importance. An emperor might bestow immense gifts upon a winning driver, or conversely, punish a losing faction's supporters, demonstrating the symbiotic but dangerous relationship between the ruler, the celebrity athlete, and the common fan. The Circus Maximus, therefore, was the great stage of Roman celebrity culture. It offered a spectacle less bloody than the arena, but far more financially and emotionally invested. It was the moment in Otium where the Roman citizen felt most alive, most connected to his tribe, and most invested in the fate of a singular, wealthy, and universally recognized superstar. The tension was now released, setting the stage for the final, private pillar of the day, the feast.
This is an excellent subtitle that grounds the excitement of the spectacles in the experience of the average citizen. Having covered the political machinery and the stars, we now bring the focus back to the Roman fan in the cheap seats. Here's the next section of your historical narrative, focusing on the ordinary Roman sensory experience of the games. How ordinary Romans experienced the spectacles. For the vast majority of Rome's population, the spectacles, whether the drama of the gladiatorial ring or the speed of the circus, were not abstract political tools or exercises in celebrity worship. They were the most visceral, accessible, and affordable form of leisure available. While the senator reclined on his marble podium, the ordinary Roman, the plebeian, experienced the games in a raw, overwhelming sensory bath that cemented their connection to the empire. Getting to the arena. The games were free or cost only a nominal entrance fee, a crucial component of panem et circenses. This accessibility meant that when the ludi were announced, the city underwent a seismic demographic shift. Hundreds of thousands of people, previously crammed into the 6- or 7-story rental apartments, insulae, poured out toward the massive venues. The journey itself was a chaotic, shared moment of otium. Vendors hawked cheap wine, bread, and programs. The air buzzed with excited chatter, factional arguments, and the clatter of sandals on the cobblestones. The sheer size of the Colosseum or the Circus Maximus was a constant, humbling reminder of the city's power and permanence. As the plebeian entered the grand arches and climbed to his designated spot, he was participating in an event larger than his daily struggle for survival. He was an integral part of Rome. A controlled chaos. Once inside, the sheer sensory experience of the Roman spectacle was designed to be overwhelming, a complete departure from the grime and routine of the tenement. The sight, the sheer scale of the crowd, a vibrant tapestry of colors and faces stretching up to the sky. Below, the red sand of the arena, the arena, stood in sharp contrast to the white marble and banners. When the sun caught the weapons of the gladiators or the gilded chariots, the flash was blinding. The sound, the noise was deafening and tribal. Not just the roar of the crowd, but the shrill blare of horns, the rhythmic clash of swords, the crack of the charioteer's whip, the groans of the wounded, and the excited shouts of the vendors. This was the collective voice of Rome, united in volume, if not in opinion. The smell. The stench was complex and unforgettable. Warm animal musk from the exotic beasts, human sweat,
cheap perfume, blood, and the heavy aroma of incense and saffron sprinkled by the emperor's attendants to mask the less pleasant odors. The intensity was physical, the crush of the crowd, the vibration of the horses' hooves through the benches, and the primal rush of adrenaline that came with every near miss or successful strike in combat. The god's eye view. The ordinary Roman seat was often high up in the wooden stands, manianae, offering a distant but comprehensive view of the action. These seats were uncomfortable, crowded, and offered no protection from the sun or rain, yet they were prized possessions. From this vantage point, the plebeian had a unique perspective. 1. Mass action. They could see the entire grand narrative unfold, the tactical maneuvers of the gladiators, the formations of the venatores, hunters, or the entire 7-lap arc of the chariot race. 2. Collective power. The height emphasized the sheer size of the crowd. Looking down, the ordinary Roman saw himself as part of an unstoppable tidal wave of humanity. His voice, combined with the thousands of others, was momentarily the most powerful force in the empire, capable of sparing or condemning a gladiator. 3. The factional fortress. In the circus, the common folk occupied the central sections where factional loyalty was loudest and most intense. They were the heart of the green, blue, red, or white tribe, exchanging chants, jeers, and wagers with their neighbors. Snacks, souvenirs, and swindles. The affordability of public viewing went beyond the ticket price. The arena was a place where a small amount of money could buy momentary luxury and excitement. Food and drink. Unlike the elite's elaborate convivium, the plebeian's arena meal was cheap and satisfying. Vendors provided quick snacks like pastries, chickpeas, sausages, botulis, and most importantly, copious amounts of wine, often watered down but effective. This food was part of the panem promise, a guarantee of physical sustenance to go along with the spectacle. Souvenirs and memorabilia. The average Roman spent money on souvenirs, clay lamps featuring their favorite charioteer or gladiator, small amulets, and often illegal gambling slips. The economic activity surrounding the games was vast, providing cheap thrills that could be taken home and displayed in a humble tenement. The power of chance. Crucially, the emperor or organizer sometimes threw small wooden tokens into the crowd. These tokens, if caught, could be redeemed for prizes ranging from simple foodstuffs to silver or even title to an apartment. For the ordinary Roman, this was a tangible, miraculous reward, a sudden burst of wealth that made the long, uncomfortable day worthwhile and reinforced the ruler's generosity. The emotional catharsis. The experience was fundamentally an emotional one, a collective catharsis. By witnessing extreme violence and death, real or theatrical, the average Roman felt more secure in the comparative safety of his own life. The games were a release of tension, a licensed opportunity to scream, to weep, to gamble, and to hate in public without consequence. In the stands of the Colosseum or the Circus Maximus, the Roman citizen, regardless of his poverty or lack of political power, found validation. He was not just watching Rome's might, he was participating in it. His cheers fueled the action. His thumb decided the fate of a combatant, and his collective frenzy was the very voice that the emperor sought to appease. The spectacles were the high-volume, high-stakes expression of Roman otium, ensuring that the ordinary man left the arena feeling tired, exhilarated, and most importantly, loyal.
The thundering hooves of the chariots and the roar of the crowd in the Circus Maximus were powered by something far more volatile than mere athletic skill. They were fueled by a deep societal addiction to gambling. The chariot races, more than any other Roman spectacle, transformed otium into a high-stakes financial venture
binding the emotional investment of the spectators directly to the outcome of the race. While Roman law technically frowned upon gambling, wagering, or alea, was often prohibited outside of specific festivals, the reality was that the practice was pervasive, utterly ignored by magistrates, and inseparable from the experience of the ludi circenses. The Circus Maximus was not just a racetrack, it was Rome's largest, most chaotic betting parlor. Factional wagers. The most common form of betting was centered on the factions, the blues, greens, reds, and whites. For the ordinary Roman, who lived paycheck to paycheck, a day at the circus offered a tantalizing, albeit risky, path to quick, unexpected wealth. The betting process was informal and conducted on the spot. Plebeians would loudly negotiate terms and odds with professional bookmakers, or simply with the person sitting next to them. A denarius on the green team's auriga to win, or 3 on the red to place. The sheer number of races in a day, often 10 to 12, meant that the opportunity for financial peril or profit was constant. A winning bet on a popular driver for a favored faction might only yield a small return, but the payout for correctly predicting the victory of an underdog charioteer or a highly complex combination of winners was life-changing. For the Roman poor, the enormous risk at the circus could mean the loss of their week's wages, potentially spiraling them into debt with loan sharks. Conversely, a successful win could buy new clothes, pay a debt to a patron, or secure a more comfortable evening at a tavern. This volatility made the emotional investment in every race absolute. The cheers and the boos were not just displays of loyalty, they were the collective guttural reaction to sudden shifts in personal financial standing. Politics and patronage. Gambling was certainly not confined to the plebeians. The rich elite in the lower marble seats, the senators and equestrians, also participated, though their wagers were often more subtle, larger, and carried political implications. For the elite, betting was less about subsistence and more about 1. Showing confidence. Waging a huge sum on an emperor-favored faction, like Nero's beloved Greens, was a public declaration of loyalty, a form of political performance that showed the bettor was in sync with the ruling powers. 2. Private deals. Wagers often served as a cover for transferring large sums of money in ways that skirted legal or social restrictions. A loss could be disguised as a political favor paid, and a win could be a kickback received. 3. Social lubricant. Placing large bets with peers was a way to display wealth and demonstrate a sense of sporting extravagance, further cementing one's position within the aristocratic inner circle. The stakes were literally higher. While the plebeian might lose a denarius, the wealthy might lose entire villas or portions of estates on a single 4-horse race. The intensity of their passion, though perhaps more restrained than the common crowd's, was no less potent. The role of the auriga in the betting scheme. The charioteer was not merely a passive recipient of the crowd's devotion. He was an active element in the betting ecosystem. Charioteers were often implicated in fixed races or betting schemes. Drivers, desperate for money or manipulated by powerful faction owners, were sometimes paid to deliberately lose or even to cause a crash that eliminated a rival. The high-profile nature of the aurigae meant that any hint of foul play or an unusually poor performance would spark intense rioting and suspicion. The booing and jeering that erupted when a favorite lost spectacularly was often rooted in the financial devastation of the crowd, who felt cheated not just by fate, but by corruption. This gave the crowd a powerful voice, often forcing emperors or organizers to address accusations of race fixing to maintain order. Curse tablets and divine intervention. The depth of the Romans' investment in gambling is best illustrated by the discovery of thousands of curse tablets, or defecciones. These were small lead or wax tablets inscribed with elaborate curses against rival charioteers, their horses, and even their factions. These tablets were often rolled up and secretly buried near the circus, or tossed into wells, appealing to chthonic or underworld deities to physically harm the opponents. A typical curse tablet might read, "I curse the horses of the green team, the driver of the blue team, and the entire red faction. May they be twisted, may their legs break, and may their eyes fail in the race." The presence of these magical imprecations reveals that for many Romans, the line between sport, finance, and supernatural intervention was blurred. When enormous sums of money were on the line, people turned to every available means, legal, illegal, and magical, to secure a winning outcome. Ultimately, the gambling addiction surrounding the circus was essential to the Roman spectacle. It created an atmosphere of frenzied, high-stakes investment that turned a simple horse race into a life-and-death financial drama. The anticipation, the exhilaration of the win, and the crushing despair of the loss were all bundled into the price of admission. It ensured that the Circus Maximus remained the most powerful single venue for emotional and financial risk-taking in the entire empire.
The Romans' relationship with wine and water. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the Forum and cooling the stands of the Circus Maximus, the Roman day of Otium transitioned into its third and final, most intimate pillar, the evening feast. At the heart of this sacred social ritual, whether it was a grand, exclusive convivium or a humble gathering in a rented room, lay one indispensable element: vinum, wine. The Roman relationship with wine was fundamentally different from our modern view. Wine was not a celebratory treat or an isolated spirit. It was a daily staple, a dietary necessity, a mark of civilization, and the primary fuel of evening leisure. However, to understand its central role, one must first understand the strict etiquette surrounding its consumption, an etiquette defined by the act of dilution. Why Romans never drank wine straight. The most striking difference between ancient Roman wine culture and modern consumption was the universal practice of mixing wine with water. To drink wine neat, merum, was considered the height of barbarism, the practice of the uncivilized Gauls, Scythians, or, worst of all, drunken slaves. For a Roman citizen, consuming straight wine was a sign of a lack of self-control, leading to excessive inebriation and social shame. The mixing was carefully managed. Wine was poured from an amphora, a large storage jar, into a crater, a mixing bowl. Water, sometimes heated, sometimes chilled with snow imported from the mountains, was then added. The ratio varied, but a typical mix was 3 parts water to 2 parts wine, or even higher dilution. This practice served several purposes: health, in a time when water quality was unreliable, adding wine, which was often slightly acidic and stored in sealed vessels, made the drink safer. Flavor. Roman wine was often syrupy, thick, and highly potent, making dilution necessary to render it palatable. Sociability. The diluted wine allowed guests to drink continuously throughout the hours-long feast without quickly collapsing into incoherence, facilitating the long, important conversations that defined the convivium. The act of mixing was managed by the arbiter bibendi, master of the drink, often chosen by lot at the beginning of the feast. This person dictated the mixture ratio and the number of rounds, ensuring that the pace of intoxication was controlled, reflecting the Roman obsession with order even in their indulgence. Wine as a status and geography. Not all wine was created equal, and one's choice of vintage was a crucial indicator of status.
The most prized wines were aged for years, sometimes decades, and came from specific, legendary vineyards, often near Naples. Falernian, considered the absolute pinnacle, often dark and potent, reserved for the very wealthiest banquets. Massic, or Cettine, highly respected vintages, favored by emperors like Augustus. For the ordinary citizen, wine was a necessity, but often a cheaper, locally produced, sour vintage. Wine from the lower provinces, or that which had been kept too long and turned into vinegar, was the domain of the poor and slaves. Crucially, the Roman fondness for altering wine's flavor created its own industry. Ingredients were routinely added to improve the taste or shelf life. Seawater, added to certain vintages to provide a slightly salty taste. Spices and honey, used to create sweet mulled versions, especially popular during colder months. Pitch or resin, used to line storage vessels, imparting a distinct flavor. This manipulation of the final product further emphasized wine's role not just as a drink, but as an art form and a status marker. The more exotic or refined the vintage, the higher the host's social standing. Wine, women, and law. In a context of early Republican Rome, women were traditionally forbidden to drink wine, and violation of this custom was seen as grounds for divorce or even death, though this practice faded by the imperial age. This prohibition was based on the belief that wine led to adultery and other moral lapses. By the imperial period, however, elite women openly drank wine, and their participation in the convivium became essential for social maneuvering. Nevertheless, the ingrained association of neat wine with a loss of virtue persisted, reinforcing the need for controlled, diluted consumption during social gatherings. Wine in the tavern. While the elite were discussing philosophy and politics over carefully diluted Falernian at their convivium, the plebeian was likely consuming his wine in the rowdy environment of a copona, or taberna, tavern or pub. Here the rules were looser, wine was cheaper, poured carelessly, and often less diluted. The goal was less about sophisticated conversation and more about quick, effective intoxication. The taverns were hotbeds of gambling, prostitution, and loud arguments, often targeted by magistrates for their perceived moral degeneracy. For the poor, wine was a democratic and essential escape from their harsh reality, a quick path to oblivion that bypassed the complex rituals of the upper class. In both spheres, the refined convivium and the chaotic copona, wine was the undeniable foundation of the Romans' evening leisure. It facilitated conversation, lowered social barriers temporarily, and provided the necessary warmth and relaxation to complete the transition from the stress of negotium to the comfort of the private sphere. The stage was set. The crater was full. All that remained was the performance of the evening feast. Status, strangers, and the formal dinner party. The Roman convivium, the formal dinner party, was the capstone of elite otium, the final, most strategic, and most rigidly structured event of the day. It was far more than a simple meal. It was a carefully choreographed performance where wealth, wit, and social status were consumed alongside the food and wine. This was the moment when political deals forged in the clamor of the forum or the steam of the baths were subtly yet definitively sealed. The convivium typically began around the 9th hour, mid-afternoon, and often lasted until well into the night. It was an exercise in controlled extravagance, demanding precision in every detail, from the choice of silverware to the number of couches used. Couches and hierarchy. The setting for the feast was the triclinium, dining room, named for the 3 dining couches, lecti, that dominated the space. Unlike modern dining chairs, guests reclined on their left side, supported by cushions, using their right hand to eat. The arrangement of guests was the first and most critical act of social signaling. The 3 couches were arranged in a U shape, allowing the host to easily supervise and interact with all guests. Within this space, a rigid hierarchy was enforced. Lectus aemus, lowest couch, reserved for the host and his family. Lectus medius, middle couch, the most prestigious couch reserved for the convive, the guests of honor, such as ranking senators, wealthy businessmen, or important foreign dignitaries. Lectus summus, highest couch, reserved for lesser guests, often including clients, freedmen, or individuals whose presence was more decorative than essential. The host's power was absolute in this room. By assigning a guest to a specific couch and even a specific locus, position on the couch, he publicly declared that person's current standing and favor. A slight reassignment could signal a political fallout. A promotion could mean a new alliance. The performance of culinary extravagance. Roman food preparation was designed for shock and awe. The elite dinner was a theatrical event meant to impress and sometimes intimidate. The host was judged not merely by the flavor of the food, but by its rarity, presentation, and sheer logistical audacity. The dinner was typically divided into 3 courses: gustatio, appetizers, light foods to stimulate the appetite, such as eggs, fresh vegetables, seafood, and the initial light wine mix, mulsum. Prime mensae, main course, the extravagant heart of the meal, featuring exotic meats like peacock, flamingo, or dormice, a delicacy. Dishes were often presented in elaborate, visually deceptive ways. A pig roasted to look like a hare, or a centerpiece designed to look like a living landscape. The goal was to prove the host had the wealth to procure the impossible. Secundae mensae, dessert, sweets, fruit, and honey cakes, often served during the final, heaviest drinking phase. The most humiliating aspect for the lower-ranking guests was the phenomenon of distinctiones, the deliberate disparity in service. While the guests of honor enjoyed expensive Falernian wine and prime cuts of meat, clients might be served inferior, diluted wine and cheaper cuts, or even scraps. This was a naked but accepted public display of their subservient status, reminding them that they were there to witness, not fully partake in, the host's generosity. Conversation and entertainment. Once the food was served and the initial mixing of wine was complete, the true work of the convivium began, the conversation. This was the moment for the performance of wit. Guests were expected to be articulate, knowledgeable, and capable of intelligent debate on philosophy, poetry, and politics. A poor conversationalist could be just as shamed as a man who drank too much. To break the occasional conversational lulls and to showcase his refined taste, the host provided additional entertainment. Musicians and dancers, often slaves, they performed during the meal. Acrobats and mimes, providing visual spectacle and levity. Philosophical readings. Sometimes a slave would read classic literature or philosophical texts to stimulate deeper discussion. However, the ultimate highlight was often a carefully prepared, amusing speech or poem delivered by the host or a favored guest. The goal was to be entertaining, but never to overshadow the host. The political aftermath. As the evening wore on and the arbiter bibendi ordered a stronger mix of wine, the conversation often turned serious. The comfortable, relaxed atmosphere provided the ideal cover for delicate political and business negotiations. Securing alliances. Two senators, competitors in the daylight, could quietly agree to a voting bloc after several rounds of wine. Recruiting clients. A wealthy host could solidify the loyalty of a promising young man with a public show of favor, offering them a position or a loan. Intelligence gathering. The host could gently probe guests for news, rumors, or political weaknesses, using the relaxed setting to elicit information that would be impossible to gain in the formal forum. The convivium was in the end a subtle blend of otium and negutium. It was relaxation with a purpose, indulgence with a distinct objective. The complexity, the expense, and the social stratification of the dinner party confirmed the host's position at the apex of Roman society, ensuring that the day of leisure culminated not in rest, but in a final, calculated display of power.
Eating, drinking, and vice in the Roman capone, or tabernae. As the flickering lamplight of the triclinium illuminated the sophisticated diners of the elite, an entirely different kind of light, the smoky, uneven glow of oil lamps and hearth fires spilled from the doorways of the Roman capone, or tabernae, taverns and inns. These were the havens of the vast Roman populace, the urban plebeians and the working class, the necessary, cheaper, and often disreputable counterpoint to the refined convivium. For the man living in a crowded, dark, and often structurally unsound insula, apartment block, the tavern was an essential extension of his home, offering warmth, light, conversation, and most importantly, affordable food and drink. This was the raw, unpolished face of Roman otium. The atmosphere of chaos and community. Stepping into a typical Roman tavern was a sensory plunge into the heart of the city's underbelly. The floor was likely dirty, the air thick with the smell of spilled wine, cheap cooking fat, stale sweat, and wood smoke. The noise was constant, loud, slurred arguments, the clatter of earthenware cups, the shouts of the tavern keeper, and the relentless sound of dice slapping on a table. Unlike the elite's controlled environment, the tavern was a place of immediate, democratic chaos. Patrons sat on rough wooden benches or stools, elbow to elbow, sharing the meager, functional tables. Here the boundaries of class blurred. A legionary on leave might share a table with a street vendor, a visiting merchant, or a dock worker. The social hierarchy of the day was temporarily suspended in favor of cheap camaraderie and collective escapism. The menu of the masses, cheap sustenance. The food served in the capone was designed for sustenance, not show. It was a far cry from the peacock and exotic fish of the Senate class. The typical menu relied on simple, filling ingredients that could be cooked quickly and cheaply. Pottages and stews, thick, hearty mixtures of legumes, lentils, beans, and scraps of meat served bubbling hot from the central kitchen. Sausages, botulis, simple, spiced sausages, often served with bread. Simple bread and cheese, the staple meal for those who could afford little else. Fried fish, easily sourced from the nearby Tiber or the coast. The greatest value came from the hot water access. For many plebeians, the only way to cook a hot meal was to buy it ready-made from a tavern or a thermopolium, a fast food stand. The tavern provided this necessary heat and food that their own poorly equipped insula apartments could not. Wine, uncut and uncontrolled. As detailed earlier, the elite's wine was a civilized drink, carefully diluted. In the capone, wine was often consumed in its most basic form, closer to marum, or neat wine, or mixed crudely. It was cheap, potent, and sometimes flavored with vinegar to make it last longer. The purpose was immediate intoxication. After a day of back-breaking physical negotium, hauling loads, working in the cramped shops, or serving in a wealthy household, the plebeians sought a quick, cheap path to oblivion. This rapid descent into drunkenness was a major concern for moralizing Roman writers and magistrates
who viewed the taverns as breeding grounds for civil unrest and moral decay. The lure of vice, gambling, and prostitution. The official condemnation of Kauponais stemmed largely from the rampant vice that flourished within their walls. Taverns were inextricably linked to two major forms of plebeian leisure and lawlessness. One, illegal gambling. Despite laws prohibiting it, gambling with dice, or alia, was the primary activity in nearly every tavern. Patrons would furiously roll their tesserae, or dice, wagering small but significant sums on the outcome. The tavern keeper often facilitated the gambling, sometimes by providing weighted or rigged dice to cheat unsuspecting patrons. For the plebeian, the desperate hope of a lucky win or the agonizing realization of a severe loss fueled the dramatic intensity of the tavern atmosphere. Prostitution. Many taverns doubled as brothels, with the waitresses or resident slaves often expected to serve as sex workers. This combination of cheap wine, gambling, and readily available sex solidified the tavern's reputation among the elite as a den of infamia, or shame, and a threat to public order. An essential social safety valve. Despite the legal and moral condemnation, the Kauponais was absolutely vital to Roman life. It functioned as a social safety valve and a crucial community hub. Information exchange. This was where the plebeian news cycle played out, passing along rumors, political gossip, heard from patrons, and news from the provinces. Temporary escape. For a few coins, the ordinary Roman could buy dignity, warmth, and the momentary illusion of wealth or success, escaping the cold, cramped, and desperate reality of his daily life. In the end, the Kauponais was the unglamorous, enduring face of Roman leisure for the masses. It provided an alternative to the highly controlled, politically driven relaxation of the elite. It was raw, honest, and necessary, offering simple indulgences fueled by wine, a longing for luck, and a deep human need for community after a long, hard day of labor.
Entertainment for hire at the Roman feast. The success of the convivium, that final crowning pillar of elite otium, was measured not just by the quality of the wine or the rarity of the peacock, but by the sophistication and variety of the entertainment provided. Once the main courses were served and the wine began to flow in earnest, the dining room transformed into a private theater, with the host acting as the impresario. The Roman elite did not merely eat in silence. They consumed a carefully curated performance designed to showcase their wealth, taste, and power. This bespoke entertainment was provided by a specialized workforce: musicians, dancers, actors, and various other slaves and hired professionals, whose labor ensured the host's reputation for refined leisure. Music was the essential backdrop to the Roman feast. Unlike the spontaneous, raucous singing that might break out in a Kaupona, music at the convivium was disciplined, intended to be pleasant background accompaniment rather than a dominant force. The primary instruments included the tibia, a double reed pipe similar to a modern oboe, which provided a reedy, rhythmic sound; the lyra and cithara, stringed instruments similar to the Greek lyre and guitar, typically used for accompanying vocalists or for more reflective melodic pieces; the hydraulis, a sophisticated water organ, representing a high-tech status symbol for the extremely wealthy, offering a complex, powerful sound. Often, the musicians were slaves trained since childhood in specialized arts. Their performances, usually set to soft rhythms, aimed to create an atmosphere of relaxed contemplation. A host might commission a musician to perform a specific piece of lyric poetry set to music, demonstrating his deep appreciation for classical Greek culture and his ability to command such talent. The talent of the performer reflected directly on the connoisseurship of the host. Dancers and acrobats. As the evening progressed, the entertainment became more visually stimulating. dancers were highly prized, performing complex routines that ranged from graceful, slow movements to energetic, often suggestive choreography. Gender and performance. While female dancers were often sensual and viewed as highly desirable, male dancers and acrobats were also popular, providing displays of athletic skill and physical control. Acrobatics. The inclusion of acrobats and jugglers provided bursts of excitement and novelty. Their skill represented the host's ability to procure the most unusual and technically demanding forms of mirth, myrtus. These acts served to shock and entertain, momentarily breaking the formal intellectualism of the dining room. This live entertainment was a crucial counterpoint to the intellectual discourse. After hours of discussing philosophy or political strategy, a dazzling display of physical prowess or a seductive dance offered a needed psychological release, preparing the elite mind for more wine and further negotiation. The reader and the wit. Not all hired entertainment was purely sensory. The Roman elite prized intellectual stimulation, and a host would often employ a slave, a lector, to read during the feast. The lector would read aloud from works of classic Greek literature, Latin poetry such as Virgil or Horace, or perhaps the satirical essays of the host's favorite writer. This performance served two key functions. One, cultivation. It displayed the host's own erudition and deep knowledge of the classics. Two, conversation starter. The readings were often used to subtly introduce a topic for debate or discussion, guiding the guests toward themes the host wished to address, whether political, philosophical, or artistic. Further entertainment came from the guests themselves, encouraged by the host to engage in games of wit, impromptu poetry readings, or the telling of amusing anecdotes. The most sought-after guest was the one who could be the most spontaneously witty, provided they never eclipsed the host's own efforts. Slaves as performers. The entire entertainment structure of the convivium rested on a profound social contradiction. The performers were almost universally slaves or individuals of low social standing, infames. The musicians, the dancers, the readers, and the servers were all human property. They brought beauty, intellectual stimulation, and joy to the room, yet they were utterly without rights. Their artistry was owned by the master, and their success was merely a reflection of the host's wealth. This fact underscored the very nature of elite Roman leisure. It was a luxury paid for by the labor and sometimes the humiliation of those beneath them. The performance was a deliberate, refined display of dominium, mastery, where the host commanded not only wealth and political power, but human talent. By the time the convivium reached its conclusion in the early hours of the morning, the guests had been satiated, intellectually stimulated, and entertained. The success of the feast ensured the host's social position was temporarily elevated, confirming the enduring power of private manufactured leisure in the Roman world. The final glass of diluted wine was consumed, and the elite Roman went to bed, ready to resume the strategic pursuit of negotium after a night of strategically deployed otium.
Intellectual games and private gardens. For the educated Roman elite, otium was not solely defined by the roar of the circus or the wine-fueled conviviality of the dinner party. There existed a counterculture of leisure, one dedicated to silence, reflection, and intellectual pursuit. This quiet retreat was vital, acting as a necessary balm to the aggressive, crowded, and politically fraught environment of the city. To the Roman philosophical mind, true leisure was not the absence of work, but the cultivation of the mind and soul. This form of otium was most often found in two private spaces,
the library, and the horti, private gardens. The sanctuary of scrolls. While public libraries existed, the wealthy Roman considered a private library an absolute necessity and a profound status symbol. A man's collection of scrolls declared his education, his philosophical alignment, and his connection to the Hellenic intellectual tradition that Rome so admired. The library was an inner sanctum, a place of deliberate solitude, designed for serious reading and contemplation. The pursuit of doctrina. Leisure here was dedicated to doctrina, or learning, and literae, or literature. The Roman intellectual would spend hours immersed in texts, reading the histories of Livy, the poetry of Catullus, or the philosophy of the Greeks, often with a slave reading aloud to aid digestion. This intellectual exercise was seen as making the citizen a better rounded, more informed participant in state affairs, thus making otium a subtle form of negotium. Reading as self-improvement. Figures like the philosopher Seneca championed reading as a moral duty. He warned against the feverish excitement of the games and the drunken stupor of the feasts, advocating instead for the quiet, measured pace of engaging with texts. The goal was to build inner resilience, constantia, against the unpredictability of fortune. The showcase. The library itself was a work of art. Scrolls were often shelved in beautifully crafted wooden cabinets, sometimes protected by cedar oil. Busts of great Greek and Roman thinkers adorned the walls, and the room was often flooded with natural light. The library was a space meant to be admired by a select few guests, a quiet, sophisticated declaration of wealth and intellectual superiority that eclipsed any show of brute military power. Philosophy in Flora. Perhaps the most beloved form of quiet leisure was the time spent in the horti, the private gardens attached to the elite domus, or, more expansively, the vast landscaped grounds of a suburban villa. If the forum was the stage for negotium, the garden was the stage for restorative otium. The Roman garden was meticulously planned, often designed less for growing food and more for creating a stylized, idyllic landscape reflective of Greek philosophical schools. Miniature paradises. Gardens featured carefully pruned trees, sculpted hedges, ornamental ponds, fountains, and marble statuary, often imported Greek originals or excellent copies. They were meant to be miniature paradises, a slice of controlled, perfect nature within the chaos of the city. The stoa and the peristyle. Many gardens included a stoa, or a covered walkway, or a peristyle, a columned portico, providing shelter from the sun or rain while allowing the resident to walk, read, or contemplate. The very act of walking through the garden was a philosophical exercise, a tradition inherited from the Greek peripatetics. Solitude and health. The garden offered true escape from the noise and smells of Rome. It was a space for reflection, for quiet dialogue with a single trusted friend, or simply for sitting and breathing clean, scented air. This physical and mental restoration was considered essential for maintaining a balanced mind necessary for the rigors of statecraft. Intellectual games and simple pleasures. Intellectual otium also included quieter games and pastimes that contrasted sharply with the high-stakes gambling of the circus. Ludus duodecicum scriptorum, a strategic board game resembling backgammon, requiring careful thought and planning. It was a quiet challenge, often played in the shade of the portico. Poetry and writing. The composition of poetry, letters, or philosophical treatises was a cherished pastime. Pliny the Younger often described retiring to his villa to write, finding the silence conducive to deep creative work. This personal writing was a form of self-expression and intellectual discipline. Art appreciation. The quiet contemplation of art, statues, wall paintings, and mosaics was another pursuit. The private home became a personal museum where the educated Roman could display and reflect upon the high points of Greek and Roman artistry. In the quiet corners of the private library and the shaded pathways of the Horti, the Roman elite found the truest expression of restorative leisure. This was the otium that was not a spectacle, not a transaction, and not a performance for the masses. It was a private dialogue with the self, a deliberate act of cultivating the inner life, ensuring that the Roman citizen could return to the brutal realities of negotium with a mind refreshed, fortified, and armed with wisdom.
The Roman vacation and the seaside villa. For the powerful Roman, the otium enjoyed within the city walls, the baths, the gardens, the evening feast, was a necessary daily balm. But true, profound respite required distance. The ultimate expression of sustained leisure, the closest thing the ancient world had to the modern summer vacation, was the withdrawal to the countryside or the sea, the sanctuary of the villa. The villa was not merely a large house, it was an economic unit, a philosophical retreat, and a deliberate escape from the political, legal, and social suffocations of Rome. When powerful figures like Cicero, Pliny the Younger, or even Emperor Tiberius felt the crushing weight of negotium, they packed their scrolls, their favored slaves, and their philosophical friends and retreated to their properties along the Bay of Naples or the Tuscan hills. The two faces of the Roman villa. Roman villas were generally categorized by their function, reflecting different forms of leisure. 1. Villa urbana, a suburban villa close to Rome, designed primarily for quick, short retreats. These were often elaborate extensions of the city domus, featuring elaborate artwork, heating systems, and facilities for hosting large parties, allowing the host to maintain a social network while claiming a break. Villa rustica, a working farm complex often located in the countryside. While the master's quarters were luxurious, the primary purpose was agricultural production, wine, olives, grains. For the owner, overseeing the property could be a form of practical otium, a chance to engage with the natural world and the economics of his estate, a grounding contrast to the political machinations of the Senate. The most desirable location for the seaside villa was the Bay of Naples, particularly the resorts of Baiae, Puteoli, and Pompeii. This region became the ancient world's Riviera, a playground for the super-rich, where the air was cleaner, the views were spectacular, and the standards of propriety were noticeably looser than in the capital. Swimming and excess. The coastal villas offered activities impossible in Rome. Sea swimming. Pliny the Younger described the pure pleasure of bathing in the clear, cool sea, a contrast to the recycled, crowded waters of the public baths. Elaborate jetties and private harbors were constructed for easy access to the water. Sailing and fishing. Simple, low-stakes activities that provided a contrast to the high-stakes politics of the city. Horace, the poet, often praised the simple life of a fisherman or farmer, idealized virtues the Roman elite sought to embody during their break. Baiae's debauchery. The resort of Baiae gained particular notoriety. Famous for its hot springs and therapeutic waters, it quickly became associated with extreme luxury, conspicuous consumption, and moral excess. Historians like Tacitus and poets like Martial noted that Baiae was a place where virtue itself had gone on holiday. This locale demonstrated that the removal from the capital's scrutiny could lead to an otium defined by total indulgence. How Roman leisure invented modern entertainment. After traversing the chaotic streets, the steamy halls of the thermae, the blood-soaked sand of the arena, and the lavish couches of the convivium, it becomes clear that the Roman day of otium was more than just ancient history. It was the blueprint for much of modern Western leisure. The fundamental ways in which Romans sought escape, status, and community
established enduring templates that continue to shape global entertainment, particularly in American culture. The enduring echo of Roman otium lies in its genius for mass spectacle, accessible luxury, and status-driven consumption. From Circus Maximus to the Super Bowl. The most direct and powerful legacy of Roman leisure is the modern stadium experience. The passion that fueled the Circus Maximus and the Colosseum is the same energy that drives modern-day fandom across America, from college football games to NASCAR races. Massive scale and spectacle. The Roman belief that entertainment must be large, loud, and immersive is alive today. The Colosseum, designed to hold 50,000 spectators for gladiatorial combat, is the structural ancestor of every multi-billion-dollar stadium built today. The goal remains the same: to assemble a massive crowd for a collective emotional experience. The tribal faction. The fanatical color-coded loyalty to the blues, greens, reds, and whites is mirrored perfectly in the enduring tribalism of the NFL, NBA, and MLB. Modern fans wear team colors as badges of identity, engage in fierce but non-lethal rivalry, and experience vicarious triumph through their athletes. Star athletes as commodities. The superstar status of the Auriga, like Gaius Apuleius Diocles, who commanded massive wealth and adulation, is the template for today's highest-paid professional athletes. These individuals, regardless of their social origin, transcend class through their skill and fame, becoming living legends whose faces adorn merchandise and whose careers fuel a massive economy. Gambling as fuel. As explored previously, the high-stakes wagers and illegal betting that drove the circus are now a legalized, integral component of American sports culture. The financial investment of the fan, the thrill of the wager, adds a crucial layer of personal consequence to the outcome of the game, just as it did in ancient Rome. The passion is directly proportional to the risk. The legacy of the thermae. The Roman bathhouse is the unmistakable ancestor of the modern gym, spa, and health club. The Roman genius was recognizing that cleansing and exercise were fundamentally social acts. The social hub. The thermae was a place for business, networking, gossip, and exercise, a multi-purpose social center. Today's high-end spas, country clubs, and corporate gyms serve the exact same function. Places where professional networking happens on the treadmill, in the sauna, or over a protein shake. Accessible luxury. The principle of making a luxurious experience, heating, pools, massage, available to a mass audience is the foundation of the multi-billion-dollar modern wellness industry. Every heated pool, steam room, and specialized massage service can trace its roots back to the Roman caldarium and the strigil. The focus on appearance. Just as the Roman performed his status through exercise in the palestra and the display of a well-maintained physique, modern gym culture often revolves around the performance of fitness and health as a visible sign of status and discipline. Dining, entertainment, and status, the enduring convivium. The Roman convivium created the template for status-driven dining and private entertainment that persists in the modern West. The curated experience. The modern celebrity chef and high-end restaurant trade their success on the principles of the convivium, not just serving food, but presenting a theatrical, exclusive, and expensive experience. The rare imported ingredients, the wine list, and the meticulously planned seating arrangements all echo the distincciones and extravagance of the Roman feast. Performance and status. Just as Roman hosts hired musicians, readers, and dancers, modern elite parties rely on specialized entertainment, private bands, stand-up comedians, or hired performers to showcase the host's wealth and exclusive taste. The food is the vehicle. The status is the purpose. The necessity of escape. Finally, the Roman duality of negotium and otium perfectly frames the modern professional's obsession with the work-life balance. The Roman retreat to the villa is the model for the modern weekend getaway, the summer rental house, or the Caribbean cruise. The fundamental human need to create a geographical and psychological distance from the source of stress, to leave the city and seek a controlled, luxurious form of leisure, is a concept codified by the Roman elite 2 millennia ago. In essence, the Roman citizen, whether he was a slave at the dice table or a senator in his garden, was searching for the same things as his modern counterpart: a thrilling distraction, an opportunity for connection, and a moment of dignified rest. By creating institutions that satisfied these needs on a mass scale, the Romans not only defined their own leisure, but charted the course for the culture of distraction and indulgence that would thrive in the West centuries later.
What the Roman day off teaches us about human nature. We have traversed the Roman day of otium, from the sudden release of negotium at noon, through the collective steam of the thermae, the tribal frenzy of the circus, the exclusive luxury of the convivium, and the quiet solitude of the villa's horti. We have seen their complex relationship with wine, their appetite for blood, and their relentless pursuit of social standing. Now, as the final echo of the chariot race fades and the last lamp is extinguished in the triclinium, we are left not with a historical accounting, but with a profound realization. The Roman day off is a mirror reflecting the universal, enduring elements of human nature. The ancient Roman, separated from us by 2 millennia, lived under a different sky, under different laws, and in a different moral universe. Yet the fundamental drives that dictated his leisure are precisely the same drives that define the modern American search for work-life balance, entertainment, and fulfillment. The Roman day off teaches us 3 indelible lessons about the human condition: the inviolable need for escape and release, the fierce, deliberate transition from negotium to otium proves that the human mind cannot sustain endless toil. The Roman recognized that stress, obligation, and the constant pressure of ambition must have a structured outlet, a pressure release valve. The brutality of catharsis. The demand for gladiatorial games was not simple sadism. It was a deep need for catharsis. Witnessing an extreme sanctioned violence allowed the citizen to purge his own pent-up anxieties, frustrations, and aggressions in a safe, communal space. The modern equivalent is not violence, but the demand for extreme emotional release. The terror of a horror film, the adrenaline of an extreme sport, or the roar of a stadium crowd. We, like the Romans, need moments where our primal emotions are validated and exhausted, leaving us momentarily purged and ready to face ordered life again. The desire for sensory overload. The noise, the heat, the steam, the crowds, the speed. Roman leisure was a deliberate sensory assault designed to shock the system out of its workday rut. This craving for total immersion defines modern entertainment, from theme parks to loud, spectacular concerts. We seek experiences so intense that the worries of yesterday cannot intrude. The human spirit craves the oblivion of total sensory engagement. Leisure as a tool for connection and status. The most striking lesson from Roman otium is that leisure is rarely solitary and almost never purely recreational. It is fundamentally a social performance and a vital tool for community building. The social marketplace. The bathhouse was not about getting clean, it was about being seen. The convivium was not about eating, it was about securing advantage.
For the Roman, the day off was the primary marketplace for networking, client loyalty, and the careful display of wealth and wit. This mirrors the modern professional world, where golf courses, exclusive restaurants, and high-end retreats are essential sites for forging bonds and navigating the hierarchy. We instinctively use our downtime to reinforce our position within the tribe. The shared experience. The vastness of the circus and the universality of the thermae proved the human need for shared experience. Being part of a massive, unified crowd, cheering for the same driver or sweating in the same heat, provided a powerful, temporary sense of equality and cohesion that transcended the strict class divisions of Roman life. Today, this search for collective identity drives us to concerts, massive sporting gatherings, and shared viewing experiences. We crave connection through common passion. The pursuit of the private self. While the public and social aspects of Roman leisure were dominant, the existence of the quiet retreat, the library, the horti, the distant villa, highlights the counterbalancing need for solitude and self-cultivation. For the elite, the finest form of otium was the time spent reading philosophy, writing poetry, or walking quietly in the garden. This was the recognition that true self-mastery, the core Roman virtue, required internal intellectual labor. This ancient commitment to otium literatum, literary leisure, reminds us of the modern demand for mindfulness, meditation, and quiet hobbies, the understanding that intellectual and spiritual rest is as crucial as physical rest. The idealized life. The desire to retreat to the villa was a yearning for an idealized, simpler life close to nature. It was an acknowledgement that the pressures of urban complexity are ultimately exhausting. This universal longing for a break from it all, for a place where one can momentarily control one's environment, is why the modern vacation home, the quiet campsite, and the secluded destination remain the ultimate prizes of success. In conclusion, how Romans really spent their free time is not merely a catalogue of historical practices. It is a profound commentary on the human animal. Whether they were staking their savings on a 4-horse chariot team or hosting a dinner party designed to shame their lesser guests, the Romans were engaged in the timeless search for escape, status, and pleasure. And the great ironies of their otium, that leisure was hard work, that freedom required the labor of slaves, and that their greatest moments of togetherness occurred in violent spectacle, are the same ironies that subtly define our lives today. We may have replaced the strigil with the loofah and the gladiator with the quarterback, but the human heart still beats to the Roman rhythm, a relentless pursuit of purpose and a fervent, essential flight from it. And in that shared, timeless search, we find our enduring, unbreakable connection to the citizens of the mighty, passionate, and ever-entertaining Roman Empire.